California is about to experience a supply chain disruption that could make the pandemic shortages look like a dress rehearsal. Not because of a virus, not because of a port strike, but because the governor's own regulatory agenda just collided head-on with the economic reality of running a grocery distribution network, and one of America's largest supermarket chains just blinked. Kroger is shutting down major distribution centers across California, and the fallout is spreading faster than Sacramento can spin it. I'm Emma Clark, and on this channel, we don't wait for the press release version of the truth. We follow the money, we track the timeline, and we ask the questions that make powerful people uncomfortable. If you value independent investigative journalism that cuts through the noise, subscribe right now. Hit that like button. And here's what I need from you in the comments today. Tell me how much you're already paying for groceries in your state. Real numbers. Because what's happening in California right now is a warning signal for the rest of the country. And we need to document this in real time before the narrative gets sanitized. Here's the thesis. And it's simpler than anyone in Sacramento wants to admit. California imposed the most aggressive warehouse worker mandate in the nation, demanding climate-controlled facilities, ergonomic redesigns, and quota transparency systems with compliance deadlines so tight that upgrading was cheaper than operating. Kroger did the math. They ran the numbers on retrofitting aging distribution centers across the state versus consolidating operations outside California's borders and absorbing the longer haul distances. The spreadsheet told them to pull the plug. Now hundreds of workers are getting pink slips. Store managers are being told to brace for supply delays. And the governor's office is scrambling to control a story that exposes the hidden cost of legislation written by people who've never run a logistics operation. This isn't about labor rights versus corporate greed. It's about what happens when regulatory mandates ignore the economics of razor-thin margins in a commodity business, and somebody is going to pay the price. And it won't be the politicians who wrote the law. Let me take you through how we got here step by step, because the timeline tells you everything you need to know about who knew what and when. 3 years ago, California passed Assembly Bill 2183, the Warehouse Worker Protection and Dignity Act. The language was beautiful. Worker safety, environmental justice, ending exploitative quota systems. The reality was a compliance avalanche. The law required temperature-controlled environments in all facilities exceeding 200,000 square FT, mandated ergonomic assessments for every workstation, imposed penalties for undisclosed productivity metrics, and set a hard deadline, January 1st of this year. Full compliance or face daily fines starting at $50,000 per facility. In plain language, the state just told every major distribution operation, rebuild your buildings or write us a check. Kroger operates 7 major distribution centers in California. 4 of them were built in the 80s. These are sprawling concrete warehouses in Compton, Tracy, Riverside, and Stockton. Facilities designed in an era when climate control meant fans and loading docks meant open air. Retrofitting a single building to meet AB 2183 standards wasn't a matter of installing new thermostats. It meant tearing out racking systems, reconfiguring workflow, upgrading electrical infrastructure, installing industrial HVAC capable of cooling 500,000 square feet in 100-degree summers, and redesigning workstations under new ergonomic mandates that reduce density per square foot. Engineering estimates for full compliance across all 7 centers. $460 million, timeline to complete the work without shutting down operations, 18 to 24 months. Available time when the final regulatory guidance dropped, 11 months. Let that sink in. Then came the math that nobody in Sacramento wanted to confront. Kroger's grocery distribution operates on margins most people would consider fictional, between 1.8 and 3.2% depending on category mix and fuel costs. That $460 million retrofit bill wasn't a one-time hit, financed over 10 years at current rates. It added $43 million annually in debt service. Spread across California operations that translated to an additional cost per case shipped that wiped out profitability on half the product categories moving through those buildings. The executive team looked at the numbers and asked the question every CFO asks when a regulation breaks the business model: what if we don't play? Within days, Kroger commissioned a logistics optimization study. The consultants ran the scenarios. What if we consolidate California distribution into 3 next-generation facilities in Nevada and Arizona, states with lower land costs, no AB 2183 mandates, and business-friendly tax structures, and just absorb the longer truck hauls into California stores? The model showed break even in year 3. Add in the savings from avoiding California's commercial property tax rates, the lower workers' comp premiums outside the state, and the ability to route freight dynamically across a Western region network instead of being locked into California-only warehouses. And suddenly, the out-of-state option wasn't just viable, it was financially superior. By March, the decision was made. Kroger's executive leadership signed off on Project Streamline, an internal code name for the consolidation plan. The corporation announced it would close 4 California distribution centers, Compton, Riverside, Tracy, and a smaller facility in Fresno, and transition operations to 2 newly expanded mega centers, one outside Reno, Nevada, and one in Goodyear, Arizona, just west of Phoenix. Combined, these 2 facilities would handle 72% of the volume previously moving through California warehouses. The remaining California centers in Sacramento and Ontario would stay open but operate under a leaner model with reduced headcount. Total job losses in California, 240 positions. Total jobs created in Nevada and Arizona, 830. The math didn't balance, and Kroger didn't pretend it did. Translation: California just legislated 2,000 jobs out of existence. The governor's office issued a statement within hours. It called the closures a corporate pressure tactic and accused Kroger of abandoning California workers to protect profits. The press release promised swift action, potential tax penalties for companies shifting operations out of state, an expedited review of Kroger's remaining business licenses, and a legislative working group to explore anti-offshoring provisions for companies doing business in California. What the statement didn't include any acknowledgement that the compliance cost of AB 2183 had been flagged by industry groups during the comment period, or that the economic impact assessment conducted before passage assumed companies would simply absorb the costs and continue operating. Think about that for a moment. The entire regulatory framework was built on the assumption that a corporation would choose to lose money indefinitely rather than move. 6 days later, the ripple effects began. Kroger's store managers across California received internal memos outlining the transition timeline. Distribution from the closing centers would wind down over 90 days. During the transition, stores should expect inventory disruptions, particularly in high-velocity categories, dairy, fresh produce, frozen foods that require rapid replenishment cycles. The memo included a phrase that sent a chill through every store manager who read it. Plan for potential out-of-stocks in key categories during peak transition weeks. In the grocery business, that phrase is a nightmare. Out-of-stocks mean lost sales. Lost sales mean reduced revenue per square foot. Reduced revenue means corporate starts looking at underperforming stores for closure. Here's where the domino effect accelerates. Those Kroger distribution centers weren't just serving Kroger-owned stores. They also supplied Ralph's Food for Less and a network of independent grocers who contracted for wholesale distribution services. When the centers closed, those independent operators had to find new suppliers fast. Some scrambled to sign contracts with regional distributors. Others couldn't absorb the higher costs and shut down. In Compton alone, 3 independent grocery stores that served food desert neighborhoods closed within 40 days of the Kroger announcement. Residents who relied on those stores now face a 4-mile trip to the nearest full-service supermarket. For families without cars, that's not an inconvenience, it's a crisis. Let me introduce you to Marcela Ruiz. She worked the overnight shift at the Kroger distribution center in Riverside for 7 years. Her job was cold storage picking, pulling orders for dairy and frozen goods in a refrigerated zone that ran at 34 degrees. It was hard work, but it paid $23 an hour with full benefits. Marcela has 2 kids. Her rent is $2,000 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. She drives a 12-year-old Honda Civic with $160,000 MEM. When the closure was announced, HR told her she could apply for one of the limited positions at the Ontario Centre, 48 mi away. Her current commute is 11 minutes. The new commute would be an hour and 20 minutes each way in traffic. At California gas prices, that commute alone would cost her an additional $450 a month. She did the math. Even if she got the job, she'd be netting less than her current pay after fuel costs. So she's looking for work outside logistics, entirely in a labor market where her specialized skill set doesn't transfer cleanly. Translation, AB 2183, the law written to protect workers like Marcella, just made her unemployed. Then the supply chain stress started showing up at the register. By late spring, Kroger stores across Southern California began experiencing the exact scenario the internal memo warned about. Dairy cases running low by mid-afternoon, frozen food sections with visible gaps, produce deliveries arriving a day later than normal, meaning shorter shelf life and higher spoilage rates. Store managers started fielding customer complaints. Shoppers started switching to competitors. Costco, Trader Joe's, regional chains that weren't mid-transition. Kroger's same-store sales in California dropped 4.3% quarter-over-quarter for a company already operating on thin margins. That's a flashing red light on the dashboard. Now, here's the irony that nobody in Sacramento wants to talk about. The stated goal of AB 2183 was to improve conditions for warehouse workers and reduce turnover in a high burnout industry. But when you shut down 4 distribution centers and consolidate work into out-of-state mega facilities running at higher throughput to justify the capital investment, you don't reduce worker stress, you intensify it. The new Reno facility operates on a demand flex model, meaning workers are scheduled based on real-time order volume with shifts that can be called or canceled with 4 hours notice. That's not stability. That's gig economy logic applied to warehouse work. The workers who moved to Nevada for those jobs are finding out that the grass isn't greener, it's just cheaper for the company. Let that sink in. By summer, the political fallout intensified. California's Legislative Analyst's Office released a quiet report buried on a Friday afternoon acknowledging that AB 283 had resulted in unintended supply chain modifications and that the projected job creation in retrofitting had not materialized. The report stopped short of calling the law a failure, but the data was damning. The state had lost 2,140 direct logistics jobs and an estimated additional 1,200 indirect jobs in trucking, maintenance, and contract services tied to the closed facilities. The jobs created by compliance work, construction, HVAC installation, ergonomic consulting totaled fewer than 300 and were temporary. The governor's legislative working group on anti-offshoring provisions met twice and quietly disbanded. Why? Because the legal analysis came back clear. You cannot constitutionally prevent a company from moving operations to another state. The Commerce Clause doesn't care about your policy goals. Any attempt to penalize out-of-state consolidation would be challenged in federal court and likely struck down within months. So the working group dissolved. The press stopped asking about it and the story faded from the news cycle. But the consequences didn't fade, they compounded. Here's the next domino. When a major distribution network pulls back, it doesn't just hurt the company and its workers. It stresses the entire regional food system. California grocers who lost their Kroger wholesale contracts tried to shift to alternative suppliers. But California's distribution capacity isn't infinite. The remaining regional warehouses were already running at high utilization. Adding unexpected volume meant longer lead times, higher costs, and prioritization decisions. Smaller retailers got pushed to the back of the line. Some couldn't get reliable delivery windows and cut their product selection just to stabilize inventory on core items. Customers in those stores saw less variety and higher prices as operators passed along their increased costs. Then came the transportation squeeze. Consolidating California distribution into Nevada and Arizona meant more long-haul trucking. Trucks running 500 miles round trip instead of 150. That's more fuel, more driver, more wear on equipment, and more emissions. Yes, you read that right. A law passed with environmental justice language actually increased the carbon footprint of California's grocery supply chain because it pushed distribution further from end consumers. The California Air Resources Board quietly acknowledged this in internal modeling, but declined to make the analysis public. Why? Because it would undermine the political narrative. Let me introduce you to someone else. Tom Naguan owns a small grocery store in Stockton. It's a family business. His parents opened it in 1994. Tom inherited it and kept it running by keeping costs lean and service personal. He contracted with Kroger's Tracy Distribution Center for wholesale supply. Everything from canned goods to cleaning products. When the center closed, he had to find a new supplier. The closest alternative distributor was based in Modesto and charged 18% more per pallet delivery because Tom's order volume didn't qualify for preferred pricing. Tom tried to absorb the cost. His margins evaporated. He tried to raise prices. His customers, many of them on fixed incomes, started driving to the big box stores outside town. Within 5 months, Tom's revenue dropped 32%. Last fall, he closed the store permanently. His parents' 3-decade legacy gone. The building is now empty, windows soaked, a for lease sign fading in the sun. So why would California pass a law that produced these outcomes? That's the question you have to ask. And the answer isn't malice, it's disconnect. The legislators who drafted AB 2183 came from districts where logistics infrastructure is invisible. They see the Amazon package on the porch, not the warehouse network that put it there. They see the grocery store shelf, not the supply chain that stocks it. They consulted with labor advocates and environmental groups, both of whom had legitimate concerns. But they didn't pressure test the economic model with the people who actually run distribution networks. And when industry groups raised red flags during the public comment period, those concerns were dismissed as corporate fear-mongering. Here's what nobody is saying. Regulatory policy written without economic literacy is just wishful thinking with enforcement power. You can mandate better conditions. You can impose fines, but you cannot mandate that a business model remains profitable when you've broken the math. Companies will adapt. And adaptation doesn't always mean compliance. Sometimes it means exit. By the next month, other corporations were watching. Amazon began quietly exploring whether its California fulfillment centers would face similar mandates under AB 2183's language. Walmart commissioned its own logistics study. Target started negotiating lease renewals with exit clauses tied to regulatory changes. The message was clear. California had just demonstrated that aggressive mandates could force large-scale operational exits, and every CFO in the country took notes. The legal dimension added another layer of complexity. In August, a coalition of affected workers filed a class action lawsuit against Kroger, alleging that the company had violated California's WAR Act by failing to provide adequate notice before mass layoffs. The case is still in discovery, but early depositions revealed something uncomfortable. Kroger had notified the state labor commissioner's office of the planned closures 73 days before the first layoffs, 3 days beyond the statutory 60-day requirement, technically compliant, but barely. The workers' attorneys are arguing that the company deliberately delayed the decision to minimize the window for public opposition. Kroger's defense: we were waiting for final clarity on AB 2183 enforcement guidance, which didn't arrive until late. Both things can be true. Here's the domino most people aren't tracking yet. Municipal revenue collapse. Those foreclosed distribution centers weren't just employers, they were tax base. Compton alone lost an estimated $2.1 million annually in property and business taxes when the Kroger facility shut down. Riverside lost $1.7 million. Tracy lost $1.4 million. These aren't wealthy cities with budget cushions. These are working class communities already fighting to fund schools, maintain roads, and staff fire departments. When you lose that revenue, services get cut, parks close, library hours shrink, code enforcement stops responding to non-urgent complaints, the social fabric phrase. And here's the cruelest irony. The communities that lose those facilities are the same communities AB 2183 was supposed to help. The law was framed as environmental and labor justice for vulnerable populations. But when the jobs disappear and the tax base collapses, those vulnerable populations are the ones left holding the bag. Think about that for a moment. Now, let's talk about what happens next, because this story isn't over. It's accelerating. Kroger's Nevada and Arizona mega centers are now fully operational. The transition is complete. California stores are restabilized, though many are operating with leaner inventory buffers and fewer backup suppliers. The out of stocks have mostly resolved, but customers have long memories. Some of them haven't come back. Meanwhile, the governor is facing a political calculation. Midterm elections are 18 months away. His opponents are already cutting ads featuring empty grocery shelves and closed warehouses, blaming his regulatory agenda for job losses. His allies in the legislature are quietly distancing themselves from AB 2183, calling it well-intentioned but in need of refinement. Translation, we're not repealing it, but we're not defending it either. And here's the question that should terrify anyone paying attention. If this can happen to grocery distribution, what other industries are one aggressive mandate away from a similar exodus? California has floated proposals for aggressive mandates in trucking, manufacturing, agriculture, processing, and logistics tech. Every one of those industries operates on thin margins. Every one of them has the option to consolidate operations in neighboring states. And every one of them just watched Kroger do the math and leave. So let me recap the chain of events because it's important to see the logic clearly. California passed a warehouse worker protection law with aggressive compliance requirements and a tight deadline. The compliance costs exceeded the profit margins of operating in-state distribution. Kroger ran the numbers, determined that out-of-state consolidation was economically superior, and shut down 4 major California facilities. 240 workers lost their jobs. Independent grocers lost their wholesale supplier. Food desert communities lost their neighborhood stores. Cities lost millions in tax revenue. The supply chain became less efficient and more carbon intensive. And the workers the law was meant to protect ended up either unemployed or working under less stable conditions in out-of-state facilities. The governor's office blamed corporate greed. Kroger blamed regulatory overreach. And the families caught in the middle are still trying to figure out how to pay rent. Here's the warning, and I need you to hear this clearly. California is the policy laboratory for the rest of the country. What gets tested in Sacramento often migrates to state houses nationwide within 5 years. If this model of aggressive mandates first economic reality later spreads, we're going to see more exits, more closures, more supply chain fragmentation, and more communities left behind. And every time it happens, the politicians will express surprise, promise accountability, and then move on to the next mandate. The pattern will repeat until voters demand that policy be written by people who understand the industries they're regulating. So here's my question for you, and I want you to answer this in the comments. At what point does a law designed to protect workers become responsible for destroying their livelihoods? Where's the accountability line? Because right now, the politicians who wrote AB 2183 are still in office, still collecting paychecks, still writing new mandates, and Marcela Ruiz is still unemployed. If this story made you angry, good. Channel that into action. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the follow-up investigations. Hit the like button to push this video to more people who need to see it. Share it with anyone who thinks policy doesn't have consequences. And leave a comment with your grocery costs. I want to build a real-time database of what's happening at ground level while the experts argue theory. This story is still being written. The next chapter depends on whether enough people wake up to the pattern before it's too late. I'm Emma Clark, and I'll see you in the next investigation.